everyone. A warm welcome to this month's Pleach Talk. Pleach India Foundation, with its mission to impact the world through the power of Indian cultural heritage, continues to build meaningful dialogues that connect the past with the present. As part of our efforts to disseminate heritage knowledge, the Pleach Talk series has been fortunate to host distinguished speakers from across the disciplines of history, archaeology, heritage conservation, and receiving immense support and appreciation from our ever growing audience. Today, we are privileged to host an eminent archaeozoologist, Dr. Pankaj Goyal, scientific assistant and in charge of the archaeozoology laboratory at Deccan College Postgraduate and Research Institute, Pune. Dr. Goyal completed his post-graduation in zoology from Goan University and later specialized in ancient Indian history, culture, and archaeology at Deccan College, Pune, where he was awarded his PhD degree under the guidance of Professor P.P. Joglekar. Over the years, he has developed a unique interdisciplinary approach that combines zoology, archaeology, and traditional knowledge systems. His research focuses on human animal relationship, subsistence strategies, and the cultural role of animals in ancient South Asia. He has studied faunal remains from numerous archaeological sites across India, including Gujarat, Haryana, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Odisha, and West Bengal. His work has played an important role in reconstructing aspects of urban life, economy, and environment. Dr. Goyal has authored more than 60 research papers and several important publications, including a monograph on animal-based subsistence of Harappan culture in Gujarat, with a special reference to Kanmer. He also serves as an associated editor of Man and Environment, one of the India's leading archaeology journals. This evening, he will be speaking on geoarchaeological windows into Harappan society, recent evidence from Gujarat. I will repeat the topic once again. Geoarchaeological windows into Harappan society, recent evidence from Gujarat. On behalf of Pleach India Foundation, I extend a warm welcome to Dr. Pankaj Goyal and to all our participants joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Goyal, requesting you to please deliver your talk.
Okay. Am I audible to all of you? Please let me know. And
Yes, sir, it is audible.
yeah. And is the slide visible?
Yeah, visible and it is in full mode.
Yeah. Thank you. So first of all, I would like to thank Please India Foundation for giving me this opportunity to deliver this talk. So as the title suggests, I'll be talking about recent archaeozoological evidence that we have from the region of Gujarat. But before going into that, I would like to talk something about zoo archaeology, or sometimes we also call it as archaeozoology. So what do we mean by this term? So basically, this is the study of animals in archaeological context or ancient context. So as you can see in this diagram, there are three basic components. From the one side, we have these humans. On the other side, we have animals, and humans have been interacting with these animals since a long time. And these interactions are happening in certain environment. So basically, what do we mean by zoo archaeology or archaeozoology? It is the study of past human animal environment interactions. In simple language, we can say it like that. So at the base of all these views is human animal environment interactions in the past. So what do we generally study? So whenever we excavate any archaeological site, we get pottery, we get different types of antiquities, but at the same time, we also get a large quantity of animal bones. Um, whenever we excavate, we'll be getting these bones. And sometimes these bones dominate even over pottery. So how do these bones um, enter to those archaeological mounds? Why do we get these bones? So basically, what we are getting, most of these bones are food refuse, means the meat of these animals was eaten in the past and the bones were discarded. And these discarded bones somehow got deposited in our archaeological mounds. And this is what we are recovering during the course of excavation. So a large chunk of these bones basically are the result of past food habits. So the meat of these animals was eaten and the bones were discarded and these bones got deposited. Sometimes we also kept pets even in the past. So we were having pets like dogs, cats. So if these pets died, so these pets were offered proper burial. So sometimes we might also encounter bones of these pets. Sometimes animal bones were used for making different types of artifacts like tools, ornaments. Some of these animals might have been traded from other parts of the world. Okay, so the bones of these animals get might also get deposited in these archaeological mounds, and during the course of excavation, we generally recover them. But a large chunk of these bones, as I'm telling you again and again, is basically the food refuse, means the food that was eaten in the past. So when we excavate any archaeological site, we'll be getting these bones. So we recover those bones through different excavation techniques. Then these bones are sent to archaeological laboratories where we study them. So this is just a picture, another way to show how these bones enter into our archaeological mounds. So some of these, as I told you, a large chunk of these are from those animals which were eaten in the past. So the meat of these animals was eaten and the bones were discarded, and somehow these bones got deposited in our archaeological mounds. Sometimes uh, these bones might enter due to some other activities also, like animals hunted by other animals. So their bones might also get deposited. Okay. Before deposition, number of activities, evidence of number of activities might occur on those bones. So if these bones are lying on a hot surface, or these are under sun for a longer period of time, then cracks might develop on these bones. If these are in water, then water will affect these bones in a different way, and ultimately these will get deposited. And even after getting deposition, these bones will get affected by a number of other factors like soils. If soil is acidic, that acids will affect these bones. If soil is alkaline in nature, then bones will get affected in a different way. And soils might have different types of microbes, bacteria, viruses, and soil might have rootlets. So these roots also secrete different types of chemicals. So bones might get affected by all these factors. And if bones are strong, sturdy, for example, if the bones belong to a large mammal like cattle, buffalo, or elephant, so these are the denser elements. So these might preserve well. And if bones might belong to, if bones are of smaller mammals like rat, birds, fish, so their bones are their density is very low, so they might get fragmented, or sometimes we might not even recover the bones of these animals. These might completely decay within the soil. So whenever and if the temperature is hot, as I told you, again it will affect the bones, and if temperature is cold, it will affect the bones in a different way. And finally, when we excavate, uh, we recover these bones and we then study these bones. So these are the things that we generally recover from archaeological sites. So we can broadly classify them into two broad categories. Macro remains, within which we have these bones, we have animal teeth, antlers, cartilages, shells, otoliths. So otolith is a stony type of substance that fish generally have in their inner ear. So it is a stony substance, so it generally gets preserved well. Then we have this chitin. Sometimes we might also recover eggshells. Some of these animals also have stomach stones in their stomach, which helps in the process of digestion. So sometimes we might also get evidence of that. Feathers are not preserved well, but sometimes we might get their impression. And then, as I told you, that these bones, teeth, shell, antlers, these were used for making different types of objects. So if they were used for making these different types of objects, we might get evidence of these objects also. Then right now we are in the era of biomolecular archaeology. So now it is also possible to extract DNA from these bones. It is also possible to extract proteins and amino acids from these bones. We can also extract lipids. So these type of biomolecules can also be extracted, and they are also throwing very important light on the past human-animal interaction. So these are the two main components. But it is not only the bones that we generally study. Of course, a major chunk of our information is coming from the study of these bones. But at the same time, we are also getting evidence of a large number of other types of evidences. For example, we also get evidences of animal motifs on potsherds. We get evidence of animal depiction on seals, ceilings, coins. Animals were also depicted in the form of icons. Animals were also depicted in the form of figurines, both in terracotta and later on metal. Sometimes we might also get their footprints. Okay, and in many folk arts, we also depict animals. Many of our folk tales are filled with these animals. And when we come to the later part, in the later historic period, we also start to get these literary evidences. So these evidences again might contain very important or valuable information regarding the past animals. So we just do not study bones. We also need to look into these other indirect sources of information, because it might be a possibility that all animals are not represented in your archaeofaunal assemblage. Some of these animals might be represented in the form of figurines. So you might not get bones of elephant, but you might get elephant figurines. So which will show that elephants were also valued in that particular cultural period. So we also need to look into these type of evidence. And if you look into the literary aspects, so we can broadly classify them into three categories. We have this secular literature, under which we can further subcategorize them into a technical treatises like Arthasastra. We have medical treatises like Charak Samhita, Sushruta Samhita. Then we have lots of travel accounts. We also have court records for different kings. We have encyclopedic literary evidences. We have Sanskrit dramas. And if you read these, then you'll find that lots of description related to animals is present in that. Like if you read Charak Samhita, Susra Samhita, then you'll find how animals were used for the treatment of different types of diseases, how milk was used for the treatment of a particular disease, how honey was used for the treatment of a different type of disease. So animals' role in the past can be gleaned if we read these literary evidences carefully. Then we also have this religious literature. For each religion, we have different types of literary texts. For example, for Hindu, we have this Vedic and Puranic literature. For Buddhist, we have canonical, non-canonical. These are just few examples. So these again contain very important information. Then we also have this folk literature. Now, this folk literature can be divided into two types. One that is recorded, but lots of these folk literature is not recorded. These have been passed from through generation uh, from mouth to mouth. These are needed to be recorded, but again, these might contain lots of valuable information. Of course, we have to be very careful when we are using this literary sources, because literature is generally biased. So if there is a poet in the court of a king, then of course he'll be praising the king. So in that scenario, his writing might be biased. So writings are always biased, but there are um, evidences which we can use. So we can correlate this literary evidence with our archaeological evidence. And if both of them are matching, then we can come out with some conclusion. So of course, we have to be cautious, but this is an important part of our archaeological evidence. So now I'll be coming to my main topic. So I just gave you a brief summary of archaeozoology. What do we do? What do we study? So now you got some idea. So now my main topic is the recent evidence from the region of Gujarat. Now I'll not be talking about in the civilization in detail. as you know, that in the civilization was spread over a vast area in the northwestern part of India. So we have sites in Pakistan, we have sites in Rajasthan, we have sites in the region of Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, Haryana, even in Maharashtra. So this Harappan civilization was spread in a vast area. So my main focus is in the region of Gujarat, where I have been working for the last 15 years. So as you can see, this region of Gujarat can be divided into broadly can be divided into different zones. So here we have the region of Kutch. Then here we have this northern part of Gujarat, and this is the southern part of Gujarat. And here this is called Saurashtra or the Kathiawar. Now this region of Gujarat is very important from certain points of view. The first important part is that it is a region which is highly investigated. So different sites belonging to different culture periods have been explored in this region, and large number of these have also been excavated. And material from a large number of these sites have also been analyzed. So we have good amount of material in our hand. So this is one point. Another point, as you can show, I have shown here two photos. This is called this is of a buffalo. This is of a Bos indicus or our Jabu cattle, humped cattle. So if you look at the recent genetic data that we have, then all these data suggest that these two animals might have been domesticated in this particular part of India. Of course, archaeologically, evidences are there, but they are not direct. So, but there are glimpses. I'll be talking about them in my future slides. So there are glimpses that these animals might have been domesticated there, but a recent genetic paper clearly establishes that these two animals were domesticated in this part of the world. So this becomes a very important region to study. So if you look at the archaeological evidence, so I have quoted here Ajita Patel. So here you can see, now for animal domestication, what data generally means, how do we trace animal domestication in an archaeological site? So all of these domesticated animals came from some wild animal. For example, dog came from wolf, cattle came from a wild variety of cattle, buffalo came from wild variety of buffalo. So if you want to domesticate any animal, first you should have that progenitor species or the ancestral species present in that particular region. So if you look at the Mycolithic sites or the Mesolithic sites in Gujarat, then we find that both wild buffalo and wild cattle were present in um, plenty. So lots of these Mesolithic sites have thrown light on the evidence of these animals, and it seems that these two animals were hunted a lot, and they were part of their subsistence economy when humans were still hunter-gatherers. Then in the northern part of Gujarat, we have a regional Chalcolithic tradition, and one of the important sites that belongs to that Chalcolithic tradition is the site of Loteshwar. In that site, we at the bottom we have this Mycolithic deposit or Mesolithic deposit. Then we have a gap, and on top of that we have this Chalcolithic deposit. So in the Mycolithic deposit, we have evidence of both this wild buffalo and wild cattle. Then site was abandoned. Later on, it was reoccupied during the Chalcolithic period, and in Chalcolithic period, we start to get evidence of cattle, buffalo, both. So based on that, now the site was excavated on a very small level. Only one trench was excavated. So data is tentative, but it has given some clear cut evidence. So Ajita Patel, who was doing her PhD at MS University of Baroda during that time, she studied the material, and I am quoting her directly. So according to her, the broad distribution of wild cattle through much of the Northwestern South Asia leaves open the possibility that there may have been multiple local centers of domestication of these animals. As noted, there are remains of large wild cattle in the ceramic Mycolithic deposits at Loteshwar, indicating that such animals were available locally. This uh, together with the presence of morphometrically small-sized cattle at Loteshwar by the first half of the 4th millennium BC, suggests that North Gujarat is an important area to investigate for the possibility of local domestication. So she saw the possibility that cattle domestication could have taken place in this northern part of Gujarat. Of course, the data is data has come only from one single trench, and we need further archaeological data to prove that. But if you read recent genetic papers, then they clearly suggest that these animals were domesticated here. So I am giving here evidence of two papers. So first paper is mitochondrial DNA variability of domestic river buffalo population, genetic evidence for domestication of river buffalo in Indian subcontinent. If you read this paper, this clearly suggests that Gujarat was the region where the domestication of buffalo was taken place. Then another paper that deals with Bos indicus domestication. So Jabu cattle are an exclusive legacy of the South Asian Neolithic. So it is by Chen et al. Again, it is suggesting these are just two examples. Recently, we have uh, more evidence which are also suggesting towards the same. So it seems that these two particular animals, cattle and buffalo, they were domesticated in Gujarat, and later on they were utilized as domestic animals, and as we'll see in the future slides, they were developed further. So now let's look at the different sites. So this is a map of Gujarat, and here you can see lots of sites. So all of these are Harappan sites. Like we have in this region of Kutch, we have this Desalpur, Juni Kuran, Pabumat, Surkotada, and then we have Shikarpur, Kanmer, and well-known site of Dholavira. In Saurashtra, we have this site of Bagasara, Kuntasi, Jedak. Then here we have Lothal, Oriotimbo, Babarkot, Wagad, Ballavipur, Rojedi, and same way, so this region, as you can see here, it is full of sites, full of Harappan sites, full of Chalcolithic sites, and most of these have been excavated also on a larger scale, and faunal remains were excavated from these, and most of these have been studied also. So I am giving you some of the sources. So this source is till 2020. So these were the people. So the site of Rangpur was studied by Bholanath from Zoological Survey of India. Then site of Prabhas Patan was studied by Dr. P.K. Thomas from Deccan College. Kanpur was also studied by Dr. Thomas. Oretumbo was studied by Paul Rishman. Rojedi was studied by uh, Kane. Surkodela was studied by Dr. A.K. Sharma. Nageshwar was studied by D.R. Shah and K.K. Bhan. Shikarpur was studied by different scholars. So Dr. P.K. Thomas studied some part of that. Later on, I also get involved in the study of Shikarpur material. So Joglekar sir and I studied some part of that. Then later on, Brad Chase also studied a part of the assemblage. And Kuntasi was again studied by Deccan College people under the supervision of Dr. P.K. Thomas. The site of Padri was studied by Professor P.P. Joglekar. Later on, I also studied a part of that. Dholavira was studied by so Roy was a student, a diploma student who was doing her diploma in ASI. So she did a small dissertation on some of the bones. Later on, Ajita Patel studied, and they have published a few papers. The detailed report is still awaited. Bagasara was studied by Chase, Brett Chase. Nagwada was again studied by Ajita Patel, Bahan and Gowda. Lothal was studied by Bholanath and S.R. Rao. Then again, D.R. Shah's team. Bakarkot Bawarkot was studied by an archaeologist, but we do not have the detailed report. But in Poshal's one of the papers, we find some information. Then recently we studied the site of Jadak. Pallavi was studied by Momin. Malvan was studied by Alur. Bagad was studied by Sonavan and Mehta. Jekhda was Bhattacharya. Bokhira was by Gaur et al. Junikaran was studied by Arti Deshpande Mukherjee et al. Khirsara was studied by Professor P.P. Joglekar and his team. Ratanpura was studied by Bhan, K.K. Bhan. Uh, Kaneval was D.R. Shah, and Navinal was studied by Abhin et al. So this is till 2020, and recently we have some more sites. I haven't included them there. So as you can see, lots of sites have been studied. And recently we also have these specialized studies. So we have special studies that deal with fish remains. So Dr. G.S. Abhiyan from Kerala University, he has been studying some sites. So he has studied data from the site of Kanmer, Shikarpur, and Bagasara, and these reports have also been published. Then Dr. Arti Deshpande Mukherjee from Deccan College, she has been studying shell remains from a number of these sites, and these have been published. And recently, we also have evidence of biomolecular type of studies, which was done by, so we have papers by Brett Chase et al. Then we also have paper by Kalyan Chakravarti et al. So as you can see, these are the, means there is plenty of data that is available. And but my focus of today's paper will be two sites where I have worked. And I have studied a huge chunk of material from these two sites. The first site is the site of Kanmer. So it is a small site, massively fortified. It is located in the region of Kutch. So it was excavated by a team of Dr. J.S. Kharakwal from Institute of Rajasthan Vidyapit Udaipur, with Dr. Y.S. Rawat, who was then Director of State Department of Archaeology in Gujarat, and Professor Toshiki Oshada from Research Institute for Humanity and Nature, Kyoto, Japan. So they excavated the site for a period of 4 years, and I was involved. In fact, my PhD is based on this site. Um, then later on, I also studied the site of Kotada Bhadli, which was excavated by, again, a team of Deccan College and State Department of Archaeology under the supervision of Dr. Prabodh Shirvalkar. So both of these sites revealed a huge chunk of material. So I studied more than 50,000 bones from both of these sites. So what type of evidence we get? So when we studied this material, then we found that um, a large variety of animals were exploited. So we have evidence of domestic animals, we have evidence of wild animals. In addition to that, we also find that different types of birds were exploited, reptiles were exploited, people were also consuming fish, they were using different types of shells, and even we have evidence of crabs. So among domestic animals, the major animals are cattle, buffalo, sheep, goat, pig. Then we also have evidence of dog and cat. And in some of the sites in Gujarat, the evidence of horse have also been reported. And in some of the sites, we have the evidence of camel also, but I have not shown them here because these are the controversial findings. I'll be discussing the controversy also in my future slides. Then different types of antelopes, different types of deer, different types of canids, phalids, uh, different variety of rodents, small mammals like Indian hare, porcupine, mongoose, all of these animals were exploited by the Harappan people. So let's first talk about the domestic animals. Let's first focus on the evidence of cattle and buffalo, because whatever site you look into, you find that it's the cattle who forms the majority. So out of 100 bones, you'll be getting almost 60 to 70 bones of cattle. So cattle were the very important animal for the Harappan civilization. And this type of pattern is visible in almost all the sites. So a huge quantity of cattle bones can be found in all these sites. So at the site of Kanmer, first let's look at the site of Kanmer. So at the site of Kanmer, we have basically four cultural periods. So at the bottom, we have this KMR1, which has been designated as early Harappan. Then we have this KMR 2A and 2B. So these are the mature Harappan stages. And they have further subdivided into 2A and 2B based on some architectural changes and changes in ceramics. And finally, we have this KMR3, which is the late mature Harappan phase. So if you look, it is mostly cattle and cattle buffalo. Now, problem is cattle and buffalo are very similar type of animals. So their bones are also very similar. So if morphological evidences are not present, it's very difficult to differentiate them as either as cattle bone or buffalo bone. So most of the time, what do? We record them as cattle buffalo if clear-cut morphological distinguishing criteria are not available. So if you look, this black color represents cattle, and this particular portion represents cattle and buffalo. So if you just look at the proportion of cattle and buffalo, then you find that almost 70 to 80% uh, material is coming from these animals in all the cultural periods. Of course, if we uh, find buffalo remains a very less. Okay, it is mostly cattle. So it is cattle which dominates the assemblage. So similar type of pattern we have at the site of Kotada Bhadli also. In Kotada Bhadli, we have only one cultural phase, that is the late mature Harappan phase. So again, you can see here 16.03% of bones belong to Bos indicus or the cattle, and then 36.32% comes from cattle and buffalo, 3.84% comes from buffalo. So if you combine these, again, a huge chunk of material comes from these two animals. Then we have these sheep, goat, pig are there, but they are very few. Then we also have these dog and cat. Now, basically the cattle, there are two varieties of cattle that we have right now. One is called Bos indicus, or the humped cattle, as you can see here, which is having a prominent hub, and this is a dollop which we find in the neck portion. And then we have another cattle variety of cattle which is without any hump. So as you can see here, it is unhumped cattle. So this cattle was domesticated in Indian subcontinent, for which we have already discussed that we have evidence from the site of Loteshwar, and recent genetic evidence is also indicating that this cattle was domesticated in this part of the world. But osteologically, it becomes very difficult to identify whether it belongs to, whether the bone belongs to Bos indicus or Bos taurus. Of course, there are certain bones. If you have those bones in your assemblies, then based on that, you can say that whether it belongs to this particular bone belongs to Bos indica and this particular bone belongs to Bos taurus. But those bones are very few, because if you look at the figurines that we have in these Harappan sites, then we also have these sort of figurines which are without hump. So it seems that while Bos indicus was domesticated here in this part of the world, people were also utilizing another variety of cattle, Bos taurus, or unhumped cattle. Now, this cattle was domesticated in other parts of the world, mostly in the European countries or the um, Central Asian part. So it seems that these cattle were also present, but the most important cattle were, of course, Bos indicus, but people were also exploiting this taurine cattle. Now, if you look at this is just a graph, just ignore that. So there's an analysis that we call minimum anatomical unit, or a MAU percentage. So here there are different types of bones. So we have this horn core, we have different types of teeth, we have different types of bones like metacarpal, atlas, axis, pelvis, scapula, humerus. So what I am trying to show in this graph, what type of elements were preserved at the site. So if you look at this graph, almost all the types were present. So whatever bones we have in our skeletal system, almost all those bones are preserved eh, at um, at both of these sites, at Kanmer and also at Kodaballi. At Kodaballi also we have a similar type of graphs. So it seems that these cattle were raised within the site itself. So even if they were butchered within the site itself. That's why we are having almost all skeletal elements present at the site. Then in archaeozoology, we can also find out the age pattern, at what age these uh, animals were culled. So if we look at the age pattern of cattle at the site of Kanmer, so let's see what happens. So this black one represents KMR3, means late mature upon phase. So there are no embryonic animals. No animal belongs to this category 0 to 1.5 years of age. So there are few cattle which belong to this category 1.5 to 2.5 years of age. And there are some animals which belong to this category 2.5 to 3.5 years of age. And very few animals survived later on. So very few animals which belong to 3.5. So most of the animals belong to this particular group 1.5 to 3.5 years of age. Now this is the age at which we generally consume the meat of this animal, because if animal passes this particular age, then it seems that meat becomes very hard and it becomes very difficult to chew the meat. So if you want to consume the meat of this animal, you will be culling this animal during this particular age. So if you look at this pattern, so it shows that these animals were mostly kept for consumption, or their meat was eaten, they were not valued for other products. But if we look at this data that we have from KMR2A, that is the mature Harappan phase, the first subphase of mature Harappan phase, then here you see that there are lots of embryonic animals. Now we have animals also belonging to this category 0 to 1.5 years of age. Of course, we are having a peak at the same age group. So lots of animals are still falling in this age group 2.5 to 3.5 years of age and 1.5 to 2.5 years of age, but lots of adult animals also survive there. So if we look at this pattern, then we see now the value of this animal is changing. Now, not only the meat of this animal was consumed, of course, it was consumed because we have cut marks, chop marks on the bones of these animals, which show that these animals were consumed, but these animals were also valued for other products. So lots of young animals, even embryonic animals, the presence of these animals show that most probably female animals were also there. Hmm? So presence of female animals pose it a possibility that most probably dairying activities might have been going on at the site. Of course, it is not a direct evidence, but indirectly it is suggesting that dairying activities might have also been going on. And lots of adult animals. Again, these adult animals might have also been kept for other purposes, like basically, if you want to use these animals for agricultural operations or for transportation activities or some other activities, we require adult animals. So some of these animals might have been kept for other secondary uses also. So here we see that cattle were not only utilized for their meat, they were also utilized for other products. Then when we look at the data that we have from KMR2B, again, similar type of data, lots embryonic animals are more, but a similar type of pattern that we have from KMR2B. A similar type of use, you can see that during the mature Harappan phase, which was supposed to be the most prosperous phase, so, people were utilizing these animals differently. Then, and if you look at the data that we have from KMR1, that is the early Harappan phase, so now this graph is very similar to the graph that we have from KMR3. So it seems that mostly animals, these animals were used for consumption and they were not utilized for other secondary purposes. Okay. Now, a similar type of picture we have from from the site of Coated Abhadli, that we have from the site of Kanmer. Again, you can see here lots of embryonic animals, lots of animals falling within the age group of 0 to 1.5 years of age. Animals falling within the lots of animals falling. Again, of course, we are having a peak at this age group, but lots of adult animals also. So it seems that these residents at both these sites were having access to wide range of cattle. Different age groups were available to them, both sexes were available to them, both male and female were available to them. And as we have seen from the data from the graph, different that the graph that showed different skeletal elements of these animals, again it shows that these animals were raised locally or very close by to the site, and shows that secondary products of these animals were very important. So these animals were also utilized for their dairy production. These animals might also have been utilized for their power, for agricultural operations, for transportation operations, etc. So now how do we say, what are the other evidence which suggests? So when these animals were utilized for these sort of activities, for example, if these animals were utilized for agriculture or for transportation, because these animals are carrying load, so certain anomalies will occur on the bones of these animals, what we call as stress markers or paleopathological markers. So there are different terms for that. So some of these terms I have written here, like we have a condition that is called proximal extosis, then we have a condition called distal extosis, and then we have a condition called proximal lipping. Lipping you can see here. So certain part gets extended and it looks like a lip. That's why we call it lipping. Then proximal evernation, because these animals are carrying lots of load, so their bones are constantly working. So specifically during and specifically at the joint region, the bones become quite soft. So this process is called hibernation. So we have evidence of all these activities at the assemblages in both Kanmer and Kotada Bhalli. So all of this shows, of course, I have just showed you the data, age data. I have showed you the sex data. So both male and female are there, and lots of male are there. So which shows that these animals might have been used for those type of activities. Then we have these type of evidences which show that these animals were used for that. And what are the evidence for dairying? So basically, there are few bones by looking into which we can say that whether it is of male or female animals. So pelvis is one of those bones. But if those bones are absent, it becomes quite difficult to determine whether these belong to male animal or the female animal. So in that scenario, what do? We also measure bones. I'll be talking about measurements later on also in detail. So by looking into these measurements, we can also identify the sex of the animal. So males are generally larger and females are generally smaller. So we have that type of data. And as we have already seen, we have presence of adult females, we have a presence of juvenile animals. We also have evidence of embryonic cattle. Okay, so all of this shows. And recently we have this scientific data. So this is from the site of Kotada Bhalli. Here, Dr. Kalyan Chakravarti and his team extracted some isotopic data, and they showed that again that what we are showing from archaeological point of view, that these animals were raised locally. Okay, and in another paper they have also uh, they were also able to extract lipid residues from the from some of the potsherds, and it showed that some of these ponds were in fact used for keeping milk, and these milk was belonging to bovine type. So we right now we also have these direct evidences which tell us that these type of activities were happening. Now, as I told you that we also collect measurements, and these measurements can be used for different types of analysis. So many things you can do by looking into these measurements. So there's one method that is called log transformation method. So it was developed by Richard Meadow, then later on was also used by Laura Miller at the site of Harappa. So similar type of analysis I also did at both of these sites, at the site of Kanmer and at the site of Kotadavalli. So I'll not go into the technical details of these analysis. So what do we generally have? We have these type of graphs. So if you look at this graph, basically we have these different points. So this is the 0 point, and then minus their negative points. So if you look, the length of these bars is different. So which suggests that different um, types of cattle were present and in this particular site. So some cattle were small, some cattle were medium sized, some cattle were large. And then Professor P.P. Joglekar also came out with another analysis that is called two-dimensional plot. So here in log transformation method, what we were doing, we were comparing our archaeological data with one modern cattle. And as a result of which we were having that type of graph. So which showed that there were different types of cattle which were available at both of these sites. So then I also tried to do this two-dimensional plots. Here, what we do, we compare our archaeological data against two different animals. So here we compared our data with these two animals, Baroda male and Desi male. These are two different breeds. And when we plotted it, now here I have included some other sites also. So there's data from the site of Jedak. There's data from the site of Shikarpur. There's data from the site of Padri. Then we also have the data from the site of Rakhigadi. Then I have also included data from Harappa, early phase, urban phase Kanmer. So if you look, then you find that again there are three different clusters. So some cattle are quite tall; they are quite big. So from the site of Padari, from the site of Harappa, and from the site of this is these are two different phases of Harappa. So at the site of Harappa and Padri, the cattle were very tall. The size was huge. In other sites, we have this cluster which show that these cattle were of medium size. And then we also have some very small sized cattle. So again, it shows that different variety, different populations of cattle were present at this site. So we have some very tall cattle, we have some very small cattle, and we also have these medium uh, type cattle. Um, so it seems that these tall cattle, again, if you look at the data, if you look at the recent cattle in the region of Gujarat, specifically that we have in the region of Kutch, and we have a breed that is called Kankraj breed. If you look at those breeds, these are huge. These are really tall cattle. Okay, but if you come to the region of Saurashtra, there we have this Gir cattle. So they are quite small compared to these Kankraj cattle. So all these different populations were present there. So it seems that not only cattle were domesticated in the region of Gujarat, later on there were development which led to different breeds. So different breeds were also coming out at these sites, which might be related to to their utilization aspect. So people were developing breeds for traction related purposes. They were using these breeds for agriculture. They were using these breeds for transportation, and for milking purpose, they were developing different types of breeds. Then we can also find out mean shoulder height of cattle by putting these measurements in some formula. So again, here I have given data from some of these sites. So wither height means height up to the shoulder. That's why this is also called as mean shoulder height. So if you look at this data, so uh, if you look again, you look at the site of JDUC, the maximum height is 130.93 centimeter. The smallest one is 114 0.02 centimeter. Even at the site of Padri, if you look, this height is quite huge. It's 134.43 centimeter. The smallest height is 130.44 centimeter. And we also have these type of cattle which are having a small height. Like we have a cattle just 87.07 centimeters. So different varieties of cattle were present, different breeds, different populations of cattle were present, which might be an indication again that these cattle were used for a variety of different purposes. Now, another important animal that we have from these sites is the is buffalo. Now, buffalo might also act in a similar way as cattle act. So we can also use buffalo milk. We can also use buffalo for traction or transport related purposes. But if you compare the data that we have for cattle and data that we have for buffalo, then there's a huge difference. If there are 60 to 70 bones of cattle, buffalo bones are only 6 to 7. So their percentage is very low. So a natural question that arises in our mind is that what could be the region of this? So the main region, as I understand, as I have shown you here in the picture also, that most of the time you will find buffaloes soaking their skin underwater. So presence of water is very important for these animals because they have some thermoregulation problem, and for that they need to soak their skin within water. So if there was water, we are having good number of buffalo. For example, at the site of Dholavira, we have these huge reservoirs which surround the site from all the sides. So the site of Dholavira was having good amount of water present. So that's why we have a good number of buffaloes also present in that particular site. In other sites where water was a scarcity, where water was not available in plenty, so people were mostly relying on cattle. And a similar type of function uh, um, might be taken in context as we see in context of cattle. So these animals might again have been used for milking, transportation, agriculture operations, and so on. Um, then if you look at the data that we have for sheep and goat, again, these are the heights. So here we do not find any major difference. And if you look at the data again from different culture periods, so you find that adult animals are very less. Of course, we have these adult animals during the mature Harappan phase. So it seems that most probably these animals might also have been used for their secondary products. So milk of these animals might have been used. But most of these animals, this is again that age group on which at which we eat the meat of these animals. So mostly these animals were used for food. So if you look at this, then we can come out with a picture like this. So cattle might have been used for food, cattle might have been used for traction, cattle might have been used for milk, cattle, we also have evidence that hide of these animals was used. Okay, this dotted line seems probable use. Most probably, milk was also consumed from goat. Milk, then sheep might have been used for wool extraction. In fact, at the site of Dholavira, which was analyzed by Dr. Ajita Patel, we have evidence where it shows that most probably sheep were also utilized for wool production. Then pig are also the pigs population is very rare. If you compare the data, pigs generally from 2 to 3%. So their percentages are very low in almost all of these sites. So it seems that pig were mostly used for meat. They do not have secondary products. So now, if you look at this secondary product, then we come to a very important picture. And then we find that these cattle were playing a very important role in this Harappan civilization. In fact, what I would like to call them as uh, uncelebrated architects. So if you remove cattle from the Harappan civilization, there will be no Harappan civilization. If you look, as I have given you enough evidence that these animals were used for transportation, these animals were used for agricultural practices. We also have evidence that these animals were used for dairying practices. So there might have been two types of specialization dealing with dairying activities. So dairying activities might have been happening at the household level, where you have an animal, you milk the animal and consume it your household. You do not sell it and you do not do the commercial type of production. And then another type of production which might have been happening during the Harappan time, could be related to the commercial production of milk, as we have these milk companies like Amul, Parag. So what these people do, they collect milk from these different farmers, and then they sell it at a commercial level. So similar sort of picture might have been present at the Harappan civilization also. So this milk might have been sold at commercial level also. So certain people's livelihood was depending upon this particular mode of subsistence. Then this milk might have been converted into storable products. So milk can be converted into cheese, milk can be converted into curd, ghee, butter, which can be stored for a longer period of time. So of course, we do not have right now the direct evidence for the consumption of these products, but there's a probability that this sort of activity might also have been happening. So certain people's livelihood was depending upon this animal by selling the milk. Now, um, people were transporting from one place to another. As I told you that Harappan civilization was spread over a large area. Of course, people must have been using horse if horse was available, but it is a controversial evidence. I'll be discussing that in future slides. So even if horse was there, it was not a very popular animal. We have very few bones of horse. So most important animals were cattle. So people must have been using these cattle for transportation activities also. So we have lots of these cattle figurines. We have these terracotta toy cart frames from different archaeological sites. So all of these evidence show that cattle were utilized for transportation activities. And I have already showed you evidence of paleopathological markers, stress markers. So most probably people were going from one place to another by using these cattle carts. Of course, these cars cannot walk for a long distance. Maximum you can push them up to 20 to 25 kilometers per day. So what was happening? Most probably people were hiring these cattle cars. They were traveling up to a distance of 25 kilometers. Then they were taking a break, or they were hiring another cattle cart. And from in the same way, they were utilizing these cattle cart, but these cattle cart were playing a very important role. These were not used for transporting people, they were used for transporting different goods. As we know that these Harappan sites were making different types of craft items also. Even in the region of Gujarat, we have shell craft items from the site of Bagasara, where a large level production of um, conch shell bangles and beads was taking place. So people were making these products and then they were supplying them to other places for consumption. So how was this material was getting transported? By using these cattle carts only. And the raw material for these items was, of course, was brought to these manufacturing sites by using these cattle carts only. Now, if you look at these Harappan sites, again, you find that most of these sites are massively fortified sites. And if you look, some of these sites have huge stones, and they required a huge construction material to create those sort of structures. So how was that material was brought for their um, production of by using these cattle cars only. So these cattle cars were not only transporting people and not only transporting goods, not were not only transporting raw material, they were also transporting technology. They were also transporting ideas, and they were also playing a very important role in the creation of these massively fortified sites. So most of these sites were built due to the uh, presence of these cattle carts. Okay, so again, if you are hiring these cattle from one, using these cattle carts for transportation from one place to another, then of course some special people might have been involved in that transportation mechanism. So their livelihood might again be depending upon these cattle. Then if cattle were, and then we also have evidence that the dung of these animals was used for plastering the floors. It was used for agricultural operations as a manure. And then we also have evidence that the dung was used for plastering the walls also. I also already showed you that the hide of these animals was used. So many livelihoods were depending upon this particular animal. So if you remove this animal, there will be no Harappan civilization. These are just few examples. Due to the scarcity of time, I'm not going to details. So there are so many things which were depending upon this one particular animal. So these were the mainstay of Harappan civilization. Then, as I also told you, that we also have evidence of dogs and cats. So there could be a different regions for keeping these animals. But of course, their meat was not eaten because we do not have evidence of cut marks, butchering marks on the bones of these animals. And so dogs might have been kept for safeguarding their houses, safeguarding their field, agricultural field, safeguarding the herd of animals. And cats might have been kept for getting rid of rodents. These are the two main regions. But another region could be related to increasing your social status in the society. So if you are having a different breed of dog, and if you are taking it for a walk in the evening, then suddenly your status in the society increases. So of course we do not have any direct evidence, but it might be a possibility that some people were keeping these animals just to increase their status in the society. Then we, as I also told you, that we have evidence of a horse, and uh, but it is very controversial. So now the problem is the bones in the region of Gujarat, we have another animal which is called wild ass, Ictus hamunus, which we have in the region of Kutch. Now, if you look at these two animals, they are quite similar. Then we have this donkey. Again, it is quite similar to these animals. And then we also have these type of animals like hybrid animals like mules and hinnis. So these animals are quite similar to each other, and their bones are again very similar to each other. As it's very difficult to differentiate a cattle from a buffalo, same way it is very difficult to differentiate a horse from a donkey or horse from a wild ass. And there are no definite criteria by which we can separate the bones of these animals. So it creates a hurdle. So I'll give you one example from the site of Surkotada. So the site of Surkotada is located in the region of Rapa Taluka in the region of Kutch. So the site was excavated by Dr. J.P. Joshi in 1990s, and Dr. A.K. Sharma analyzed the bones from this particular site. Again, in that site, we have the evidence from all three culture periods. We have evidence from for early Harappan period, then we have evidence from mature Harappan period, then we have evidence for uh, late Harappan period, and all these phases reveal the evidence of equid. So when A.K. Sharma analyzed these bones, he came out with a conclusion that some of these bones were of horse. Now, presence of horse has a political overtone also. So people generally try to associate horse with Vedic civilization. So if there was horse in Harappan civilization, then Harappan civilization was Vedic civilization. If horse was absent, then Harappan civilization was non-Vedic civilization. So that type of politics is also attached to it. So when A.K. Sharma announced this discovery in one of the conferences in Delhi, it became a very big news. Uh, then the material was again reanalyzed by another group of scientists, Richard Meadow and Ajita Patel. So they reanalyzed the material, uh, and they found that they contradicted the identification done by A.K. Sharma. They said that these bones are not of horse, but these bones are of this particular animal, wild ass, because it is present in Run of Kutch, and the site of Surkotada is located very close to Run of Kutch, and it is very difficult to separate bones of horse from wild ass. So according to Richard Meadow and Ajita Patel, that these bones which A.K. Sharmaji has identified as horse bones were in fact not of horse bones, but of wild ass bones. Then uh, the material was again studied by another scientist, Sandor Poknoy. He was a Hungarian archaeologist and he was an expert of horse bones. So he had studied horse bones from all over the world. So he was asked to analyze the material again, and he came out with a conclusion that some of these bones were in fact of horse bones. So and so there's lots of technical complexities there, based on which some of these have been identified as horsebone and some of these have been identified as uh, um, wild S bones. So there's still no clarity. Of course, so this shows that there are two groups of scholars. One group of scholars believes that there were horses during the Harappan civilization, and there's another group of scholars which believe that horses were absent. So if you and then another question that is generally raised regarding the presence of horse is the other type of artifacts. So in case of cattle, we have cattle figurines, and these have also been depicted on seals. These have also been depicted as motifs on potsherds. So people also say if horses were there, we should have figurines of horses also in some of these sites. So some of these figurines have also been interpreted as those of belonging to horse. So this is from the site of Mohenjo-daro, and this is, I think, from the site of Lothal. So these have been interpreted as those belonging to horse. Of course, there is still no clarity. We can't say clearly whether these belong to horse or ass. So according to me, whether horse was known to Harappan people or not, I clearly say that horse was known to these people, because these people were having their trades with Mesopotamian people. So people from Mesopotamia were coming here, and people from Harappan civilization were going to the Mesopotamia. And horse was a very well-known entity in that civilization. So it's not that that horse was not known to these people. And some of these horses was, in fact, might have been gifted by these Mesopotamian people to the Harappan people. So horse was there. I have seen some of these bones also from some of the sites, like from the site of Sikarpur. I've seen some of those equid bones, and those really look like of that of a horse. So horse was there. Um, but it was not a very popular animal. Their population was very, their numbers were very low. Even if they were there, they were not a major player. The major player were cattle. And right now, we, as I told you, that now, right now, we are in the era of biomolecular archaeology. So there's a technique that is called archaeozooms or polyprotomics. So it is not, people are trying to develop it in India. So some scientists are working on that. Some scientists from BSIP like Dr. Bhavna Ahlawat, IIT Gandhinagar people, and the BSIP people, they are trying to develop that technology. So once it is done, I think this problem will be resolved forever. Then, in addition to these domestic animals, we also have a large variety of wild animals. As I told you in the beginning, people also exploited different types of birds. People also exploited different types of reptiles, then molluscan shells. And if we put them according to different habitat, if we classify them according to different habitat, then we find that almost all these types of habitats are present. So we have evidence of thick woods forest. We also have evidence of thin forest, marginal forest. We also have evidence of humid evergreen open jungles. We have evidence of shrubs, savanna, bushy areas near cultivation. We also have evidence of desert run, sparse thorny vegetation. We also have evidences of wooded jungles, swamps, and tall grasses. We also have evidence of high altitude. So all different types of habitats were exploited by these Harappans. And if we look into the data that we have of bird, the most commonly bird which were exploited by these Harappans include, we have this chicken, then we have peacock, we also have evidence of duck, we have evidence of partridge, we also have evidence of pond heron, then different types of turtles, tortoises were exploited, different types of deer, like we have spotted deer, barking deer, and Barasinga, Chausinga, Nilgai, all these different animals were exploited. Then another interesting evidence that I would like to talk about is this these stories dealing with animals. So from the site of Lothal, we have these two potsherds where we have depiction of these two animals. So you must have heard about these stories, like the thirsty crow. The crow was very thirsty. Yeah, it was looking for water. So it found a pot, but the water level in that pot was very low. So what it did, it started putting uh, pebbles one by one. Gradually, the level of water came up. The crow drank the water and flew away. So this is a very well-known story, the story of thirsty crow. So we find the depiction of this story in one of the potsherd in Lothal. Same way, there's another story that is called the cunning fox. So a fox was going, then it saw that there's a bird on a branch of a tree, and the bird was holding a piece of a bread. Now the fox was very hungry, so first the fox started praising the bird that you sing very well. Please sing a song. Please sing a song. The bird got flattered and it started singing. The bird, this piece of bread fell down. Fox picked the bread and then ran away. The cunning fox story. So we also have depiction of this story again from the site of Lothal. So these type of stories, these animals were also used for symbolism. So these stories have a greater antiquity, it shows. So what type of evidence we have from these two sites? So at the site of now these two are, both of these sites are very small site but massively fortified sites. So the site of Kanmer is around 110 to 120 meters in and the Kotavalli is very small settlement. But if you look at the data that we have from both of these sites, then we find that uh, both of these sites were sufficient in terms of animal production. So these were raising animals. All the domestic animals were raised by these people only. So these were independent in terms of pastoral production. But if you look at the data that we have from the site of Dholavira, it seems that some of these animals were coming from some outside part. So if you look at the data that we have from Gujarat, for example, Dhoravira is a very big site, and we have then these smaller sites like Kanmer, Kodavali. Then we have a middle-sized settlement like Surkotada. Then Bagasara is again a middle-sized settlement. So most of these sites, if you look at the data, they were self-sufficient in terms of pastoral production. So if you look at the data, if you look from what was happening from early Harappan period to late Harappan period onwards, then we find that during the early Harappan period, people were just trying to uh, stabilize themselves in that particular site. For example, at the site of Kanmer, we saw that cattle were mainly used for consumption. Sheep goat were also mainly used for consumption. But as we go to the mature urban period, we find that now cattle were also started to be used for other products. So now cattle were used for agriculture production. So now cattle were also started to be used for transportation production. So we find that some sort of intensification in subsistence activity is happening during the mature Harappan period. And during the late Harappan period, again, we see, because late mature Harappan period or the late Harappan period is generally supposed to be the period when Harappan civilization was declining. So again, we see some sort of a decline in terms of animal production also. Then we also have this uh, diversification. So if you look at the data that we have uh, um, from early Harappan period, then very few varieties of animals were exploited. But when we come to the mature urban period, we find that different varieties of animals were exploited. Now people were exploiting different types of deer, uh, different types of antelopes, different types of birds, fish, reptiles. So we also see a diversification. Then adoption of new social strategies, as I told you. um, Sometimes what happens when we come into the culture contact with some other culture period, sometimes we also adapt their food. So similar sort of thing is visible in some of these sites. At the site of Kanmer, we find that during the mature urban period, these people were in touch with Ahar cultural people. So during this time, we specifically during the second beef sub phase. So during that particular period, we find that people started eating meat of certain new types of birds. People started meat of fish. So it might happen that these people adopted some of the food that those Ahar people were eating. Of course, we need further investigation regarding that, but these sort of things were also happening and can be uh, uh, exploited, can be examined further. Then intensive harvesting of specific resources in certain sites when we go to the late Harappan period, because as I told you that civilization was declining. So this was also showing its effect on animal consumption. So it seems that at certain sites, the bigger mammals like deer, antelopes, they were no more available. So people were started consuming even the smaller mammals. So at the site of Kanmer, again during the late Mecharopan period, we find lots of Indian hair bones. Lots of meat of this particular animal was consumed. Now this animal is very small. If you look at the meat weight, it generally provides just 1 kg of meat. So, but people were consuming meat of this animal. So intensive harvesting of specific resources can also be seen in some of these sites. Then social consideration. So sometimes society come out with certain norms and then they adopt it. So, for example, if you look at the data that we have from the site of Harappan, from the site of Dholavira, where we have these different compartments, we have this citadel area or the castle area, then we have this middle town, lower town. And if you look at the food that was consumed in these different areas, then you find that different types of meat was consumed. So the people who were living in this citadel area, they were consuming lots of wild meat. People who were who were there in the middle town, they were consuming different type of meat. And people who were there in the lower town, they were consuming different type of meat. A similar type of data we have from the site of Kanmir also, where people living in the northeastern part of the site, they were consuming different type of meat. The people who were living in the central part of the site, they were consuming different type of meat. Similar type of data we also have from the site of Bagasara. So at the site of Bagasara, again, we have a fortified area, and some people were living outside that fortified area also. So people who were living inside the fortified area, they were consuming different type of meat. People who were living outside that fortification area, they were consuming different type of meats. Even their butchering practices were different. So different people living in different areas, they were butchering animals in a different way. So those type of things are also visible in most of these sites. So I think I have already passed over my time. So these are some of the recommended readings. So if you want to know more, you can go through these references. And finally, I would again like to express my sincere gratitude to the Pleach India Foundation for giving me this opportunity. I would like to thank you. And if you have any question, I would be happy to answer.
Thank you. Good. Good evening, sir. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your illuminating talk. So that what happens is, on regular basis, we will be having some talks on archaeology, then art, architecture, etc. But within archaeology, archaeozoology is very, very essential, and paleobotany, etc. Those studies will really bring the original lifestyle of the people. Or otherwise, what happens, we read it as the history like that only. And I had a chance to meet Professor Thomas as early as 1986.
Okay.
Today, very good. And you are, actually, you are, I think, inherited the research values of Mr. Thomas and Joglekar, sir. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Then, just for the audience, I would like to give a few highlights, and after that, we will take up the queries received through chat box, sir. Yes, respected audience, Professor Goyal has given us information on very useful information we really do not get in our regular textbooks, etc. Because he himself is an excavator, participated at two particular sites, and based on the excavations, the material retrieved through the excavations, he has made a wonderful presentation here with the observations on archaeogeological remains that really help in reconstructing the lifestyle of the Indus Valley people with special reference to this particular region. Then Dr. Goyal has touched upon actually the very pertinent question what archaeozoology is, how animal remains are found, how the bones become archaeological remains. And like that, this is very interesting thing. Even the sources for archaeological remains. Then North Gujarat has a potential area for taking up investigations. Otherwise, there are many sites, as we said, that entire geography of Indus Valley civilization is very vast. But this particular region, as he has chosen, particularly those two sites at Dada and Kanmir are very important. Then he found that large number of animals are located, are found buffaloes at Dholavira, only at Dholavira. But this is for comparative study. But at Khmer, the number is very, very less because the number at Dholavira is very large and here is very small because of the site conditions and scarcity of water, etc. That is also a wonderful finding. Then he has also given us the useful information that the cattle was used for various purposes or various these things, namely traction, meat, milk, hide, wool, and again what we call is these are the particular things. And at the end, he has ended us with a wonderful thing that even horse skeletons were also found at Surkotoda. Yes, it is very essential. Then here, I think he couldn't come across with any remains of this thing. And at the end, while tracing the roots of what to call narrative stories of the crow and the fox, again crow and the picture. These are very interesting stories that went into even our Panchatantra, etc. And the base was in Indus Valley civilization. We are very much thankful to you, sir, for accepting our invitation and delivering a wonderful thought. It is totally different from the routine thoughts. Hence, we thank you once again. Now, I would like to request you that please answer one or two only. I think only two queries we received. One is Mr. Uh, Tanisha Datta. How can we conclude that within the city, the people were consuming different types of meat with respect to areas?
Okay, so this is very well documented. You can read Ajita Patel's paper. So what did she do? She analyzed fauna assemblies from all these parts, and she found that people who were living in at the castle area, they were consuming meat of these wild animals. So we have cut evidence of cut marks, butchering marks, means evidence of consumption in that particular area. And if you look at the data that we have from Middletown, there, of course, wild animals were consumed, but not at that level. A very few bones of wild animals are present in the Middletown. Mostly the bones are of cattle, buffalo, sheep, goat, pig. So those type of animals were consumed in that particular part. So based on that, we can say that different uh, uh, areas were consuming different type of meat.
Thank you, sir. Yogini Atreya, can you please elaborate a little bit on the thirsty crow and fox and the crow potshed reported from local? That was really a fascinating point. Are there any research papers to read about it?
So for that, you can read the report of Lothal. It was written by S.R. Rao. So within that, he has explained those two postures elaborately. So you'll get all the details there. So you can go through the report, the main excavation report.
Thank you, sir. We have just a few appreciations to you, and more than that, we do not have any queries in the chat box.
Yeah,
Since
in fact, I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity, sir.
yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. And we are coming to the concluding part. Then we express our profound thanks to Dr. Pankaj Goyal for an excellent and illuminating talk on geoarchaeological windows into Harappan society, recent evidence from Gujarat. The Pleach India Foundation also thanks the audience for their participation and for making Pleach Talk memorable. This is to inform you that our next Pleach Talk is scheduled on 26th June 2026 at 5 p.m. by Dr. Nilima Vasudevan, who will be speaking on stone jars of Meghalaya, archaeology and heritage. I will repeat, the next Pleach Talk is scheduled on 26th June 2026 at 5 p.m. by Dr. Nilima Vasudevan, who will be speaking on stone jars of Meghalaya, archaeology and heritage. Thank you so much. Thank you all once